Hi, Janae. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Hi, Serena. How's audio for you?
Perfect.
Awesome. Good. Janae, so the audio is not great on your side?
It's okay. I will just lean in and listen.
Can you hear
Having
Serena?
all kinds of phone problems this morning, but I'm in.
Oh, well, it's good to see you. Sorry about the problems.
Uh, how are you guys? Serena, it's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Doing good.
Good.
I feel like there's all kinds of synchronicity on this call because of the ways in which each of us is connected with each other. And I'm just loving that the three of us are here with Word Sleuth and can't wait to introduce you guys to the audience and to hear from your excerpt, Janae, and to learn more about you. I have a lot of things I'm curious about myself. So,
This
yeah.
has been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Yeah. Do you
And
want to
it's so
share?
cool.
Uh-huh. Go
And
ahead.
it's so cool that you already know Serena.
I know this is why I'm just thrilled. I feel like this trio, we were just meant to be, given all the things that have connected us. Janae, do you want to share the story of how we know each other, or do you want me to?
Um, you can.
Okay. Well,
As part of
shout
the
out. Yes, absolutely. And we're going to have a chance to introduce Word Sleuth and what that is, introduce each of the authors, hear from your excerpt, Janae. But I think this is such a great story to start with because writer and reviewer Annie McDonald had
Yeah.
read both of our debuts and loved them and said, the two of you should interview each other. That has been, it's actually been more, 2 years or something since we first met
Yeah.
each other, said that we should interview each other. We've been on author webinars together. We've been in other forums together. So I'm just so thrilled to have this opportunity to finally have this, interview that's been years in the making.
It has. And we were supposed to be on Annie McDonald's show, and the it was supposed to be August 16th, 2021. Yeah,
Incredible.
I have one of those memories. And on August 15th, the Taliban took over Kabul. And so everybody sort of decided that since my books are set in part in Afghanistan, that it would be sort of tone deaf to go on and talk about these books when the people in Afghanistan were suffering so horribly. And so we put it off thinking it'll be a month from now. And various things happened with Annie, and we just never got there. So now we are, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah, and thanks for giving a little taste of how much of the world you're going to be able to bring to this conversation. Anyone who's joined absolutely should stay. I can't wait to learn, all of these things from your experiences, Janae. I'm going to give Serena a chance to introduce herself in a moment, but I just want to describe first the Word Sleuth community that's really brought us together. So, Word Sleuth is really united by a passion for writing and a common challenge. There's a challenge called word improv. So, word improv is a writing challenge where writers write a story using a set of new words. The story can be a tale, a poem, a skit. You can learn new words and participate in word improv by following at Word Sleuth on Instagram. And I have to say, the words are really interesting. They can be obscure. Some of them I know, many of them I don't. And I think as writers, we all love learning about new words and then trying out ways to use them, which Janae, you're going to be able to show us how you've used them in a piece that you're going to read in a little bit. And then lastly, just in terms of introduction to our format today, our interview is part of the Pass the Baton series, where contributors to the Word Improv Challenge interview one another so we can get to know each other, our community, and our work. Serena, I know you've been interviewed in the past, and just, the quick story of how we met was through Independent Book Publishers Association just had their annual convention. It was a milestone anniversary for them. We were both able to be there. I saw you on stage, Serena, talking about Reinception and pitching it not only as a book, but as a screenplay. And what a compelling plot. So, Serena, please tell us about yourself. We'd love to give you a chance to introduce yourself too.
Yeah, thank you. So, like you said, I've been on here before. I was first on reading my improv and then as an interviewer, and now I'm an alternate. So, I'm sure I'll have things to say, but really, should anything go wrong with anybody else's audio, so we have a backup. And yeah, my book is Reinception, and it is new adult science fiction, and it is the first of a trilogy. And I'm happy to be here with you guys. I'm excited to hear about both of you.
Yeah, wait till you hear this bio, Serena, about Janae. I had so many things I could pick from to talk about in her bio. So let me start with this, and then we're going to get to know her in her own words. So journalist Nan Bialik calls Janae Indiana Jones with a camera. She says Janae knows what it's like to climb too close to the edge of Mount Kilimanjaro, photograph the world's deadliest snake, and lemurs serenading each other in the treetops of Madagascar. The adventure began while visiting the Mosquito Coast, where she jumped right off a train and into her future. Janae, you say, I've always dreamed of adventure, exotic places, intrigue, romance. Who hasn't? I grew up in suburban New Jersey, which is also where I grew up. There wasn't a lot of adventure. So I fueled my imagination by reading voraciously, daydreaming my way through school, and creating my own stories. I can so relate to this. Janae, before we get started with your excerpt that you're going to read from, take us to Zimbabwe and tell us how 4 bones converted you from a college English professor in Rochester, New York, to the author that you are today.
Well, this is going to be a bit of a spoiler because I am currently working on a new novel called Talking Bones, and it is about exactly that. I was on one of my first photo shoots, and I was a total newbie. I had not yet resigned from my tenured position as the director of a writing program at Rochester Institute of Technology, but I was feeling my way forward and seeing if becoming a photojournalist was the thing I wanted to do. I was in Zimbabwe, and before the shoot started, I actually had the opportunity to meet with a Nyanga. And that is the Shona and Ndebele word for a healer and a seer. And things that they do is they, where the Nyanga is from, this was an Ndebele Nyanga, and he reads what your problem is by giving you 4 gorgeously carved bones, in my case. And I held them in my hand. You warm them up in your hand. You try to convey your problem into the bones. And then you give them back to the Nyanga. You're both sitting on the floor. He throws them onto a mat that's between the two of you. And he's looking at these bones and looking at them on the mat. And finally he looks at me and he says, "You're not thinking about your problem." And I'm thinking, I don't really have a problem. And he says, "Do it again." So I do it again, and this time I'm focusing on, okay, I have a decision to make. Am I going to stay in my nice, cushy, tenured position for the rest climb and become a photojournalist? And so that's what I'm thinking is the second time I'm holding these bones. This time I threw them on the mat, and he said, you were concentrating this time. And he looks at me and he says, "You are an English teacher." I thought that was a little Twilight Zone-ish because I hadn't said anything about that. And he says, "But you have stories to tell and you should be telling them. You have pictures to take and you should be taking them." And I went home from that experience and thought very long and hard and resigned my tenure and jumped off the train.
Like, courage that must have taken. Take that literal leap, the spiritual leap, everything that you've done, and there's so much more to learn about you, and so much more I want to ask about. But I want to give the audience a taste of your writing, which is beautiful. I recently had a chance to read your novel, your third novel that's coming out later on this year. I'm going to share my quote around that novel because I absolutely adore it. And also, your topics are so meaningful, meaningful to you, but they really also touch other people's hearts, open up our minds to places in the world that we wouldn't have been able to explore. And so I think that maybe that's a good segue into reading your excerpt. And I know you've written a beautiful piece for us, Janae. You're going to read a portion of it now. We're going to come back and have more interview questions, and then the audience will be able to hear the rest of the piece towards the end of the interview. So would you like to share that piece?
Sure, I would love to. And let me just give it a little bit of an introduction. When I was writing my first novel, Behind the Lens, which is set in mostly Afghanistan, I ended up having to cut a lot of scenes. And what I'm going to read is one of the scenes that I resurrected and rewrote with the 6 words. And I'm calling it The Cutting Room Floor, a missing scene from Behind the Lens. Here we go. USS Baton, North Arabian Sea, December 2006. It's been a brutally long week, one I hope never to repeat. Bottom line, pure hell. Thanks to my never-ending interrogation at the hands of Sorelli and his Hawaiian-shirted John Smith, aka Mr. CIA. Okay, so Sorelli and his undercover SEAL team did rescue me after the Taliban ambush, but for some insane reason, Mr. CIA, with his atomized brain, thinks I was collaborating with the militants to kill Corporal Murphy and Private Lopez, my military escorts, which, according to him, is the only possible way I could have been the sole survivor. And clearly Sorelli agrees with him, in light of 7 days of him yelling at me and trying to get me to confess to something I didn't and would never do. Good God, what part of I'm a war photojournalist embedded with the coalition forces don't they understand? Late tonight, after yet one more grueling day, I joined Chief Warrant Officer Sawyer, my self-appointed guardian angel and the only person on this ship who thinks I might just possibly be innocent, at Midrats. I almost gagged when he invited me, picturing rats in the ship's hold and some horrific hazing ritual. Midnight rations, he grinned. More Navy speak. I'm halfway through the hamburger and fries the young but phlegmatic cook dished up for me. Total decadence when Sawyer pushes himself to his feet. Looks like the reinforcements have arrived, he says cheerfully. Nothing stolid about this giant of a man. Commander, can you see Annie to her stateroom after you two finish? Sawyer shoots me a look of apology. He knows he's handing me over to the forces of evil. Sure thing. Sorelli sets down a plate of cheeseburgers and repositions my mug of tea away from the edge of the table, reminding me of my folly. On board ship, one should always keep mugs and glasses in the center of the table, lest the constant rocking sends drinks crashing to the floor. Then I'll see you in the morning, Sawyer says to me and turns to go. Make it early, calls Sorelli when Sawyer's almost out the door. Annie's scheduled to go stateside tomorrow at 0600. Really? I almost squeal. You're cleared to go. Your gear's waiting for you in your stateroom. And my negatives? Next to my camera and passport. My negs are all I really care about. Sorry, confiscated. Not fair. Those negs, they represent weeks of work and pay. My editor will be furious. Sorelli shrugs and helps himself to a few of my fries. Tell me about. I snatch my fries out of his hand. More questions? You said I was clear to go. You are. He grabs back the fries. But I still want to know why you were in Kotwali, a rundown, dirt-poor village controlled by the Taliban. Not exactly the most bucolic spot in Afghanistan. Part 2 later on.
I love that the audience now has a sense for your writing and how you just immerse us in media res, right in the moment, right in the scene. You know, and this reminds me of part of what connected you and I, Janae, and why Annie thought of the two of us together is because my Goodbye Orchid series is inspired by combat wounded veterans.
Yep.
And so I'm curious, how did this become a part of your writing? You know, you're writing military characters, you're writing a war-torn country. Tell us the background.
I originally wrote a book set in northern Mexico about the maquiladoros. And Annie Hawkins was a UNHCR human rights attorney in that book. The book ultimately didn't hold together, and I finally acknowledged it, but I couldn't stop thinking about Annie. And so I asked her, what do you want to be? You're obviously not a lawyer. And she said, I'm a photojournalist. I said, great, I know a lot about that. She said, no, I'm a war photographer. So I needed a war. And I wanted a war where there was US military involvement. I also wanted there to be coalition forces. I wanted the opportunity for her to be embedded with coalition forces, because that is really the key that sets the whole series of actions for the whole series of books in motion. And so we ended up in Afghanistan. Although I've never been to Afghanistan, I've traveled among the other stands and all throughout that part of the world. And I've read a huge amount of Afghan fiction and nonfiction. I know a number of Afghan people, and they are the warmest, most hospitable, most wonderful people in the world. And it's a complex culture, and I really wanted to explore that. So that's how we ended up in Afghanistan.
Interesting. And you know, I'd actually love for you to take us in the audience back to the beginning of your writing journey, even. Because these stories, as you describe them, clearly you have so much passion for it. There are many ways in which to tell stories. Novel writing is one medium. So take us back to how you became a writer and how you became an English professor before we are where we are today.
Well, I started reading and writing when I was 4. I had a really, really good friend, Debbie, and the two of us started we started my storytelling. She went along for the ride with our Barbie dolls. And we would create these enormously long sagas that would go on for days, involving all of these dolls we had and all of these characters. And that was when I was 4 and 5 and 6. By the time I was in 3rd grade, and I had a teacher who terrified me, she assigned us to write a story. And she said, okay, boys and girls, write about something you know. And it was the really wide-lined paper that we had. And so I'm writing away page after page about a shepherd in the desert. What I know about shepherds and deserts now is as much as I knew then, nothing. And but I just kept on writing. And finally I realized she was standing over me and she had everybody else's pages in her hand and the whole class is staring at me. And so she says, are you done? Okay, here you go. I the next day, she handed back everybody's papers except mine. And then she called for me to come to the front of the room. Now, remember, I was terrified of this woman, and I thought, okay, I'm dead. I just floor, open up, and let me sink through. I went up, and she read the story aloud to the class, which was incredibly empowering for an 8-year-old. And then she said, boys and girls, we are looking at a future author.
Wow.
And I mean, to have that kind of experience, even from somebody I was terrified of, and I wasn't terrified of her after that, but she deserves a lot of credit. And from then on, I had a self-identity as an author and a storyteller, and all the kids in school knew me as that. I went to a high school reunion many years after we graduated, and all these people were coming up to me and saying, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm an English professor. No, you were supposed to be an author. I became an English professor because I loved to read. I loved to parse literary works of art and come to an understanding of them, not necessarily what the author intended, but what I as a reader was bringing to it and as a literary critic. But I was incredibly distanced from my creative self. And to get tenure, to get promotion, when you are not teaching creative writing, but you're teaching literature and directing a writing program, they don't want creative writing. That doesn't count. It doesn't enter into the equation. And so really, I was missing that creative side of myself. And that was why I set off on this journey.
So many incredible portions to that story, including the power of teachers to really shape our future and our lives. It makes me wonder, what if? A lot of what authors do is wonder, what if? What if she hadn't said that to you? And I do wonder about other careers that perhaps you had considered. And maybe this is a good segue into, you're also a very accomplished photographer, and I think introducing that part of you to the audience is important. And I'd love to know which came first, the writing, the photography, and how do they inform each other?
Near the end of my time in academia, I was starting to do some nonfiction writing. And it was fun. But then I got really caught up. When I resigned my tenure, I resigned it to pursue photography. And I was working on a photo essay documenting the lives of women and children in countries in Africa, Asia, Central and South America. And that has been a 20-year labor of love. And I mean, there are images up on my website. I have a number of galleries who carry my work. I've done a number of events. And each event that I have done, the gallery owner, as we're hanging the exhibit, is thrilled to be hearing the stories behind each image and getting to know each of the people in the images. And so what we ended up doing was writing up those stories and either posting them next to the images in the gallery or having a catalog. And that grew into, well, let me try writing short stories and using some of these people as takeoff points. And then that became, well, let's expand it to novellas. Novellas are really hard to sell. And, but Talking Bones, the experience with the Nyanga and then with other people in Zimbabwe was one of those short stories. It was one of the novellas. And then it became a YA novel, which didn't sell. And now I'm coming back around to it and writing it the way it probably needs to be written, as a novel for adults. And so I'm a couple chapters into that. So that is where I'll be going after the Rule of Thirds, the third and final book in the Annie Hawkins series, comes out in October. And I noticed that we all three write trilogies, which is really cool.
I love to hear that you're writing, that you're working on new projects, getting your work out into the world. I think, probably all three of us are really proof that we all can be multitudes, that we're not just one thing. Here you talk about starting as an English professor, then pursuing photography, a 20-year labor of love, and then really turning that into an author life. I've certainly found that too, the power of being able to reinvent ourselves, to be able to imagine different paths and be able to experiment and try many things. It makes life incredibly rich. Yeah, go ahead. You want to add something?
Oh, I was going to say, it was not just a wonderful step forward. And there was that. But there was also a mourning and grieving period when I left academia behind. I identified as an academic, and I had been doing that for many years, so long that when end of August, beginning of September rolled around, my body's clock said I should be drafting my syllabi. I should have ordered my books for the classes. So that took a couple of years to work through, and leaving one thing behind and building another.
Yeah, I can imagine, because you put a lot of years into that, and I'm sure you touched many students' lives. So that makes a lot of sense.
And I still hear from a lot of students. It's really
Oh,
cool.
yeah. Have any of them become authors?
Not that I know of, but this whole aspect of education is critical to the Annie Hawkins series. Even though she is a photojournalist, she believes in the power of education. And her college roommate and best friend, Daria Faludi, who is an expat Afghan, returns to Afghanistan for a variety of reasons, but one of them is in 2006, she wants to open a secondary school for girls in the peaceful Panjshir Valley, because she believes the only way for Afghanistan to come into the 21st century is for Afghans to bring it there, not for coalition forces. And so Annie, some years later, goes to teach a photography workshop at that school. That's all in the first book. And education is an important part in all three books.
So in the books, Annie is a photojournalist, and a war photojournalist, as you were talking about before. What can you describe for the audience, what does it mean to be a photojournalist? And how do you personally get your photographs published? I wonder if it's as hard as you getting our books into the world, getting photos into the world.
It depends. A photojournalist is basically someone who tells stories with photographs. You can add words, but your goal is to capture the events that are happening and the mood, the tension, the struggle in a single photograph. In photojournalism schools, they often start students with, okay, go to this event and you have to take X number of images. You have to capture X number of images, but then you have to weed it down to 5. And then later in the course, weed it down to 3. And then what's the one image that tells this story in all of its complexity? And that's basically what a photojournalist does. I have had a number of projects in my career. I still work on my documentary essay of women and children, but not as fully as I did before. It's fairly complete. I also have gone back to my love of wildlife photography. And I am just absolutely committed to the conservation of endangered species. And so a lot of the shoots that I go on now are for that. Um, as far as publication is concerned, because I am totally freelance, I sometimes have clients that hire me when I go in, as happened when I was on a photo shoot in Madagascar. I had a number of different clients, all wanting different things. And sometimes the publication is online, sometimes it's a gallery. I do not work for Getty or AP, and so I'm not sending in my images into their pool. Sometimes I'm hired, as I was for one of my jobs in Madagascar, to go to a school. And the whole education system in Madagascar is a long, involved story. But some NGOs have gone in, especially in the southern part of Madagascar, and they've built schools where there never were schools before, even though it is a federal law that you have to go to school from first grade through 12th grade. Most people in the countryside of Madagascar do not, because there aren't schools, there aren't teachers, and the parents can't pay for it. So some NGOs are going in, building schools, charging $1 a year tuition, which is hard for some families to meet, even that. And so a client who, another NGO was interested in possibly building another classroom, because there were 200 kids in 2 classrooms. And so they wanted me to go and photograph the whole layout, and also photograph kids, and to help them decide whether or not to build another classroom. They ended up building 2 classrooms. So there are a lot of different routes for publication. It's not just in a newspaper or in a magazine, although I've had pictures published in newspapers and magazines as well.
There's so many interesting places to go with, everything that you've brought up, because basically you're talking about visiting places in the world that we might not have exposure to, and realizing, even something that we might take for granted, school, is not available to everyone. I'm reading a memoir by Maggie Doyne, who I actually met a few weeks ago. She grew up as a suburban New Jersey kid, took a gap year in Nepal, realized that most, something like 1 in 6 kids is an orphan, that they can't, even if they're not an orphan, the parents can't afford to send them to school. And so she started a home and a school, and now has adopted, I think, 90 children, and educates 500 or something, some enormous, positive impact that she's making. It reminds me of what you're describing in Madagascar. Things that we take for granted are not available.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And, and Zimbabwe, a place I know well and I love, there are a lot of kids whose parents have died because of AIDS, who live with poverty-stricken grandparents, who are bottom line subsistence farmers, and cannot afford the school uniform, the books, the this, the that. And so I had pledged, this is a little detour, I had pledged a money to educate women and girls in Afghanistan, and all of my conduits have disappeared thanks to the Taliban. And so I have shifted to Zimbabwe, and like your friend, I've adopted 10 kids in Zimbabwe. It started out as one, it grew to 5 girls, and then we said, well, boys are there too. And so we have 5 girls, 5 boys in a part of Zimbabwe where you don't often see white people. And when I go to visit, they're stroking my arms and my hands and running fingers through my hair, and it's the most one of the most important experiences of my life, to be able to help educate kids who otherwise would not be getting an education. I mean, that's life transforming for these kids. They can, the girls especially, can avoid human trafficking. They can get real jobs because they've got an education. And they will have families, they will have a voice in the future. And also beat the odds of life expectancy being only 45 to 50. So this education is something about which I'm very passionate, and I've come at it from all different directions in my life, and I'm very, very fortunate to be in the position I am to do this.
It's so powerful, and I'm thinking about a couple of places we could go with this, because there are studies, actually. Paul Hawken, who's a leader in sustainability, and we're going to come back to the biodiversity piece that you brought up earlier. He talks about educating women and girls is one of the very powerful ways in which to try to make strides in sustainability in the world.
Exactly.
Because as we educate women and girls, they understand that they have control over their bodies, over reproductive rights, all of that. And that will make a positive impact on sustainability. And so I applaud your focus on education, whether it be in Rochester, New York as a professor, whether it be through your novels, whether it be through your photojournalism, or your very direct outreach, taking on these 10 children and really making a difference in their lives. Truly, truly incredible. I wonder if we could take a turn into Africa for a moment, and I will
favorite place on earth.
I will go ahead and share something I just found out the day before yesterday, which is in the company where I work, there's an opportunity to be an ambassador and basically work in nonprofits around the world. You only get this opportunity to even apply every 5 years. So 5+ years ago, 7 years ago or so, I went to Dublin and had actually worked with the environmental education unit there to help them set a strategy for how they were going to reach more Irish people with environmental education. So Friday, I just learned that I was successful at winning one of the very competitive placements, and I'm going to Ghana. I can't even believe it. I've never been to Africa. And I'm just filled with curiosity and excitement, probably some nerves too. So this is all new to me, and it makes me so interested in your experience in Africa. Sorry to turn it to me for a moment, but I'm like, do you have any words of wisdom for me? Any advice for anyone who might be thinking about going to Africa or wanting to? And I know, Zimbabwe, Ghana, it's not like they're the same place, enormous continent, but would love your personal wisdom.
Well, Zim is, first of all, it's landlocked and it's in southern Africa. Totally different climate than Western Africa, which is where Ghana is. However, Ghana is magnificent. It is colorful, amazing people. They are so warm, they are so welcoming, they're so hospitable, incredible food. My best advice is leave for anybody, for you, anybody, go with a totally open mind and open heart, embrace the experience, and leave your Western ideas at home.
That is probably beautiful advice for anyone who's traveling anywhere in the world. that
Mhm.
open mind to new cultures. And it is something I'm interested in because you're widely traveled. You've been to really far-flung places in the world. How do you acclimate yourself to a culture? Do you do research? Do you, sometimes my son is going to Singapore for a semester. So I said to him, you really should know some of the customs so that you don't inadvertently offend potentially. And I've been reading some, in Africa. So how do you approach that, Janae?
A lot of research. I also, I try to, well, I don't try to, I learn um, at least a little bit of the language. And of course, in Africa, almost every country has numerous different languages because it's a Western colonial concept that put in country borders.
Mm.
The people in Africa who are members of various tribes, they will butt up to each other. And you in Zimbabwe, you have the Shana in the north, you have the Ndebele in the south, and then you have a few other groups of people, and they all speak a different language, and they all have different customs. Um, and yes, it is very important to learn, um, especially the taboos. I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was in Madagascar, one of the first things I learned before I went is don't point. Westerners
Mhm.
tend to point. It is considered extremely rude
Mhm.
in Madagascar, and they have a different hand shape, which looks something like this, where you curl your finger under.
Mm.
Um, and but and they have a whole list of taboos.
Mhm.
When I was in Mongolia to photograph the Golden Eagle Festival, they speak Mongol in the eastern part of the country and the central part of the country. They speak Kazakh in the western part of the country, and totally different languages. They don't understand one another, and yet they live very peacefully together. But there are two separate um, sets of cultural norms, so that when you enter a gear, which most people know as a yurt, you have to enter in a certain direction, and men sit on one side, women sit on the other side. And when is it acceptable to turn down some kind of food in Mongolia? It's not acceptable. You eat it or drink it.
Yeah.
So a lot of research, and it will make your stay in Ghana. I am so happy for you and envious all at the same time. It will make your stay so much richer if you do a lot of that prep work
Mhm.
before you go.
I agree. Thank you for the words of wisdom. And Rebecca Reeder, who's on, said the same thing. Be open-minded, learn words. She's just, emphasizing the points that you're making are really very wise. Thank you so much. Let's
Thank you, Rebecca.
let's chat briefly about biodiversity, and then I'm going to have you read the rest of your excerpt, and then we'll have some closing words as well. So you and your husband, you talk about this real emphasis around helping endangered species. And of
Yeah.
course, our hearts go out for so many of the causes you've been talking about. I'm wondering, because this is actually one of the areas when I worked with the environmental education unit in Ireland, there were pillars of things that we could do around sustainability that had to do with, land use, water use, energy use. But biodiversity was a key pillar and an emerging pillar. Can you describe, why you think biodiversity is so important and, what makes that a cause that you're really passionate about?
Well, other than the fact that all these species are going extinct in large part because of their biggest predator, which is us. And it's not just us hunting them, but it's our use of plastics, it's our contributing to global warming, it is I'll just focus on Southern Africa. More and more people are being born and they need more and more farmland. So habitat is for these animals is disappearing. Several years ago, 40 years ago, there were 10 million elephants in Africa. Now there are 400,000. And species that people wouldn't expect are on the decline, like lions. They're vulnerable. Cheetah, leopards, all of the big cats are vulnerable. Wild dogs are extremely threatened. Lemurs are extremely endangered. They're in Madagascar, of course. But habitat encroachment, also and I understand people need to feed their families, you know, it's you've got this extreme poverty, but there are ways of working with farmers to instead of shooting animals who come in and take your crops, you can do things like grow honeybees, because elephants won't come close to honeybees. They hate the sound. Or put in rows of hot red pepper plants, because elephants don't like them. So there are things that you can do, that farmers can do to instead of killing. A number of countries have also implemented reimbursement. In Ladakh, for example, if snow leopards, and this is how they are saving snow leopards, if snow leopards come and get into the corral, the boma, and kill and eat your sheep, the government reimburses. But they also provide education on what the people can do to make their corrals safer against snow leopards. And there are a lot of programs like that in Africa as well. But there is a basic tension between abject poverty. I mean, when you have a country like Zimbabwe, where 90% of the people don't have jobs, you know, they need to feed their families in some way. And if that is farming and you have animals coming in and ruining your crops, or if you need bushmeat, you kill vulnerable and endangered animals. I get it, but that's where education is really important. And ecotourism is more and more important throughout Africa, because Westerners are willing to come and pay whatever the asking rate is for safaris, and whether it's a cultural safari, an animal safari, and they will pay top dollar to go and see the living animals and take pictures of the living animals. And that money, if it's managed right, goes directly into the hands of villagers. For example, I work with an organization called Imvelo in Zimbabwe, and they have built their lodges in and around Hwange National Park on community lands. And that means the government can never take it over, because the village has voted to establish the lodge. All profits go to be reinvested into the village. They build grocery stores, clinics, schools. They also make sure that the kids many of these kids who grow up in villages close to the park have never seen these animals before other than they might be taking over and eating the crops. And so they take the kids on safari so that they see the animals, come to know the animals in a more positive light. So there are a lot of efforts going on. And one of the efforts that we do here, my husband and I have a series called Journeys to the Ends of the Earth. And they're basically armchair safaris. And we present these at various organizations. We're debuting Big Cats and Wild Dogs this Tuesday at Shorewood Public Library. And we typically get 100 people plus turning out for these presentations. And it's mostly pictures, and we talk through a lot of these conservation and biodiversity issues.
That's incredible. I'll just add one thought, and then Janae will ask you to read the rest of your excerpt. The connection I want to add on to every amazing thing that you've shared with us is that biodiversity matters to us as humanity too, not just the altruistic part, which you've really beautifully outlined, but also species are all interconnected. And so as we start losing biodiversity, it will impact humans. Think about it as maybe a puzzle where it's missing pieces now. And so would just encourage people to think about that part too, that it does, have the potential to really affect us. But would love
One
to hear the rest of your piece. Yeah.
Honeybees. We need them to pollinate our food.
Yes.
They are crashing. What is going to happen to our food source?
Because we're using so many chemicals, pesticides, all of that is not helping. Yeah. Yeah. You brought up a lot of good agricultural practice examples. So let's hear the rest of your excerpt.
Okay. We have Annie and Sorelli at Midrats. He's helping himself to her food, and she's trying to get her negatives back. I take a bite of my burger and chew slowly, stalling, thinking about the likelihood of ever running into Nick, Josh, and Dan, the 3 asshole journalists who dumped me in the desert during one of the worst sandstorms of the year. A hazing stunt that was the start of everything that went wrong on this embed. We do it to all the newbies, especially female newbies. It was the reason I got pulled from the front and reassigned to ride around with Murphy and Lopez, taking pics of them delivering bottled water and ready-to-eat meals to the locals, which is why I just happened to be in that Taliban-controlled village when all hell broke loose. But if I tell anyone, even Sorelli, word will get out. It always does. I've heard the stories about blackballing, shunning, and worse. A lot worse. I look at Sorelli. I'd tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. The muscle at the corner of his eye twitches. I'll take my chances. I stuff a fry in my mouth and chew, buying myself another minute. Hazing, I say finally. War correspondents are a brotherhood. Men make the rules and women do what we have to stay in the game. Or we get out. Or we die. He snags my dill pickle. You're fucking kidding me. I wish I were, but I don't kid about things like that. He studies me until I look away. You take any more pictures in Kakwali? I'm acutely aware of the SD card buried deep in the pocket of my baggy camo pants. Will he frisk me? I'm betting if he were going to, he'd have already done it. So I stare at a spot just above his left shoulder and shake my head. Nope, no more. You got them all. And I think it's only fair for me to get my negs back. Your guy's already made prints. That's not going to happen. He takes the rest of my fries. You sure about what you just said? No more cards? My cheeks flame. You don't believe me? Why don't you search my room? Already did. Fuck you. Yeah. He locks his eyes on mine. Fuck me. Funny, don't you think? That we didn't find any images from your second visit to Kakwali. And don't try telling me you left the card in the Humvee because Sawyer searched it before he blew it to Kingdom Come. I know it wasn't in your camera because I checked. We sit in silence for a few minutes. Is he going to order me to stand and strip? The way he's looking at me, I know it's a very real possibility. Then he leans forward and says quietly, I didn't really think you were fucking Corporal Murphy. I get it. Should I buy that week? Or when the attack started, I was at the other end of what and heard what he said to you. You think we could have? I swallow hard. So you heard what I said to him? He nods. Pretty clear you were saying what a dying man wanted to hear. It was nice. What I'd wanted if it had been me out there. I hope it helped. My fingers claw hard into my thigh. What a waste. I pause a few seconds, remembering how I trashed Murphy right after that, then punched his lifeless arm. So I guess you heard the rest of what I said. Some of it. Transmission cut out after you said something about the key. Not my finest moment, talking to Murphy like that after he died. Understandable. You were pissed and scared. Understanding finally dawns on me. You asshole! You knew all along and you still put me through this week from hell? I had to be sure. You weren't coming clean on why you were outside the wire, alone, the week before, and I had other guys in the unit telling a totally different story, saying you and Murphy had a thing going, putting the blame squarely on you. I gape. The wall of khaki camo. Closing ranks, he shrugs. And trying to make it easier on Murphy's family, he did nothing worse than get seduced by a Mata Hari. But that's not what happened. I slam my hands on the aluminum tabletop. Sorelli leans forward and puts an index finger on my left hand. I know. Do me a favor and don't talk about this, any of this, with anyone. I'd tell you it's an order, but you don't seem to like obeying orders. But you talk, we'll bring you in. I think about that for all of 10 seconds. What choice do I have? Okay. You got any more SD cards? Now would be a good time to hand them over. I narrow my eyes. I got nothing. He leans farther across the table, so close our lips almost touch. You can't lie for shit.
Thank you, Janae. I'm going to ask you to grab your book cover so you can show it before we close out. And I'm going to share just a couple of sentences from my, when you had given me the Rule of Thirds, which is coming out this fall, or I think August. I had written, with masterful prose, Janae pits her protagonist, still freshly grappling with PTSD, against the Taliban and ISIS. The result is heart-pounding action paired with tender storytelling. Beautifully wrought and unputdownable, the Rule of Thirds earns 5 heartfelt stars. So thank you for this incredible time together. Both you and Serena. Would love you to show your beautiful book cover to the audience, and then to tell everyone where they can find you. Where can they learn more about your writing and your work?
Here is...
I think Janae's audio is cutting out. So I will say, if anyone wants to go to janneesacken.com, she has photographs there, some of her amazing, colorful backstory. Because Serena, I can't hear Janae. Is that the same for you?
Yeah, she seems to have frozen.
I think we lost our audio, but that's fine because really
We're at the end. We're good.
Yeah, we're at the end. And Serena, it's a great time also for you to share. How can the audience learn more about your incredible work? I know they can go back and watch your interview, your Word Sleuth interview as well.
Yeah, and thanks. This was a great interview. I'm glad you guys didn't need me until the end, and I really enjoyed learning everything and listening to you guys. So my book, again, is Reinception, and I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the only Serena Strauss, so you can find me at serenastrauss.com and on social media under @SerenaStrauss. And even if you spell it wrong, you'll find me.
Wonderful. And I would just encourage everyone who's either listening live or is listening to this recording later that they can learn more about WordProv and actually take part in Word Sleuth by following at Word Sleuth on Instagram or DMing at Word Sleuth if you'd like to be part of the Pass-the-Baton interviews. As far as me, the audience can find me at carolvandenhende.com or at my Linktree, linktr.ee/cvdh, and would very much love for everyone to look into Serena's Reinception novel, which just sounds incredible, as well as my Goodbye Orchid series. The third in the trilogy is coming out this October. So Goodbye Orchid, Orchid Blooming are going to be joined by Always Orchid. And there's actually an image. The covers are right behind me. So you can see those beautiful orchids there. Janae is back, which is perfect to, close us out. We lost your audio for a little bit, but we let the audience know they could go to janneesacken.com. Are there other places you'd like people to reach you?
JanneeSacken.com is great, and Facebook, Janae Sacken, and Instagram, author Janae Sacken.
And I would just say on behalf of authors in general, anyone who's listening, we all would appreciate reviews. Reviews really help algorithms, recommend our work to other readers. So please, when you're reading something, if you enjoy it, go ahead and leave a review. It can only be a few sentences is fine to help other readers find the work. Thank you so much to Janae. Thank you so much to Serena. Thank you so much to Word Sleuth for hosting this incredible Pass the Baton series. Happy reading and happy writing, everyone. Take care.
Thanks so much, ladies.
Bye.
Bye for now.